For now, though, look, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to be a reality for the NFL all day long, every day. We see players added to the COVID-19 list. There's a very high degree of transparency as to who's on it. It doesn't mean anyone is having symptoms. It doesn't mean that anyone even has the virus. You can be on the list even if you've had close contact with someone who's positive. And Peter, the flaw continues to be the absence of point-of-care testing. That's why everyone has to be so careful, because of that 24-hour lag between sample collection and test result. And in that 24 hours, if you begin shedding virus before you know you're positive, that's how the outbreak can start. And if they could just get to the point, and by they, I don't know who they is. They is whoever is out there making this stuff. If they could get to the point where there is a sufficiently accurate point-of-care test, so many of these problems would be gone because you wouldn't get into the facility until you test negative every day, every day, every day.
Yeah, Mike, I saw that hole in the testing right away. I think everybody did. That basically, if you've got to wait up to 24 hours for the result of the test, and you have then spent perhaps the previous 24 hours not necessarily in close contact. There's a bunch of teams, Mike, that I've talked to that are doing like odd things. You know how you have the this thing that says if you're within close contact for 15 minutes of anybody who's got the virus, well, every 9 minutes that the Carolina Panthers, in their meetings, if they are together in any way, even though they're doing an awful lot virtually, every 9 minutes a horn blows and everybody is supposed to get away from whoever they're around at that moment. And I know that sounds insane, but it's good insurance for, to stop hanging around with anybody, because that anybody, who knows, could have tested positive sometime that just isn't known yet. So to me, I think those are the kind of steps you have to take to make absolutely sure that nobody transmits it.
And the Bills yesterday had to send all of their rookies home after a sufficient number of them ended up on the COVID-19 list. The rookies and the quarterbacks are a little bit ahead of everyone else. We're in the first few days of camp, and the veteran players have to test negatively 3 times before they're cleared to get onto the field. The rookies and the quarterbacks have been there a little bit longer. They're in the building. Not in Buffalo. They were sent home because they want to get this thing under control. They're doing the virtual meetings, not the in-person meetings, to keep guys separate. But this is what we have to worry about, no matter what steps are taken to ensure that the virus doesn't spread in the facility. It still can, especially if guys are bringing it with them. And that's why John Gruden said what he said, Peter. And we're going to play Mike Tomlin from yesterday, making it crystal clear that this year, for an NFL player, your job definitely goes home with you, and what you do or don't do once you leave the facility is a key part of whether or not you're going to end up being held accountable. Here's Tomlin from Thursday.
You guys know I like catchphrases, but what you're talking about is conduct that is detrimental. And that's a term that's used often in our business, and appropriately so, because in this COVID environment, if you're not exercising discretion and being thoughtful about how you move, that conduct is detrimental to your cause and to ours collectively. And so that's the messaging that I'm delivering to those guys. We got to conduct ourselves accordingly. There's been a lot of work to position ourselves to be where we are right now. It's one fail, all fail in this environment. And so we're going to continue to package the messaging that way and be very transparent. It is that. It's conduct detrimental to their efforts and ours.
He's absolutely right, Peter. And in many respects, the teams that are best able to minimize the number of players who are on the COVID-19 list throughout the course of the season, those teams are going to be more successful because they're going to have their best players available to them. I mean, it's strange to think that on some Sundays, as a practical matter, the game is won before the game even starts because you're able to put your 22 regulars out on the field on offense and defense, and the other team may have 5, 6, 7 of those guys gone because their players haven't been as conscientious. Now, the hope is that everybody will be conscientious so that there won't be a team that is completely depleted at any position group or across the board. But The fewer, just like with injuries. I mean, this is just we see every year when we look back at the end of the season, the teams that had the fewest guys on injured reserve, the fewest starters unavailable to them per game, those are the teams that tend to be successful. Well, you got another twist this year. You have something that isn't an injury that can make your guys not available. So if you can keep your guys available, you're more likely to be successful.
You know, Mike, I think dovetailing on that, we're headed into a very interesting weekend in the NFL. Not only because you're going to see more positive COVID tests, I'm sure, basically because this is the week that the players are coming back. And it's not only interesting because teams can basically start this weekend, other than Kansas City and Houston, which already have. They can start doing actual football stuff after the physicals. But I also think it's interesting because Monday is the deadline for opting out. We've already seen the New York Giants lose their left tackle, understandably, Nate Solder. We've already seen the New England Patriots lose their 5th and 6th starters on defense. So now it's not only free agents, but it's opt-outs. And to me, this is a long weekend that's going to tell the tale a lot about who is going to contend and who isn't in the NFL in 2020.
And Peter, let me add just a small caveat to that, because as of last word when I checked Wednesday night and I tried again last night, because the CBA revision has not been finalized yet, the 7-day window for opting out hasn't even opened. So if that agreement is not signed as of this moment, and I have not heard that it is, and I've seen no indication to suggest that it is, and the lawyers had it bogged down as of Wednesday night, today, 1 week from, is the earliest that the opt-out deadline can come. So this is going to hover once we get into practice. And I like this. This is one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because Sims and I have been addressing this from time to time. The NFL wanted a very early opt-out deadline. They want to know who's in. They want to know who's out. Well, the problem is some of these guys may need to show up. They may need to look around. They may need to begin to get ensconced in order to have an idea, that gut feeling, is this right for me? Is this right for my family? And as it stands, you got 4 extra days now because this agreement isn't done. 4 extra days for the players to come to a conclusion, an informed conclusion as to whether opting out is or isn't the right thing for them. And I've just got a general hesitation with this speak now or forever hold your peace idea. I think there should be more time for players to make a final decision. And I think there should be an opportunity, like we see in baseball, for a guy to say, I was out, but you know what? I feel more comfortable now. I've paid attention to what you guys are doing. I've paid attention to what's happening. I want back in. Yeah. Your thoughts on that?
I think what's really interesting, Mike, is I talked to an agent yesterday and I asked him about this, about how many guys he has who he still thinks might opt out. This is a big agent. And he said, as of right now, I've got 3 who are still considering it, 2 of whom have told their coach that they'd let them know by the end of this weekend. But as this agent said, and I found this very interesting, once players get into the building and they see their friends and they see the guys who they're with, they feel more, mostly, I think, and that's what this agent said, especially about 2 of his 3 guys, they feel like they really would like to be there. So he said if they had to make the decision before they went into the facility at all, even just to take a test or to be on some virtual meetings, they felt like maybe they were going to opt out. And his agent said, if I had to guess now, I'd say at least 2 of my 3 guys are going to go back because the juices have started flowing about playing football again and obviously making money again.
At a minimum, I'd like to see the players have until 2 or 3 days after the fully padded practices begin in the middle of August, because it's one thing to walk into the facility and see how everything is spaced out and see everyone with masks on and the contact tracing devices they have, and everyone's in the meeting rooms far enough apart to the extent they even do the meetings in meeting rooms this year. I'd want to see how a guy feels, and if I was one of the players, I'd want to see how I feel after being out there in close quarters on a football field when you're in a full 11-on-11 session. A lot of these practices are going to be more intense than in other training camps, Peter, because they have to take the preseason, the opportunity to separate the wheat from the chaff in the preseason and jam it into training camp, and coaches have said they're going to have more competitive periods during practice. I'd want to know how I feel after being in a pile-up, having a guy right across from me. Just am I comfortable in that setting that this is going to work? And maybe give it a couple days to see if there's a little mini outbreak once they start having those 11-on-11 practices. I just wish guys had more time. I understand why the league wants to know who's in and who's out, but what you may be doing by having a deadline so early, you may be getting some guys to opt out who otherwise would have stuck around if they had more time to get to that level of comfort that you're talking about.
Well, the problem that I see with that is not only would the coaches really not want that, obviously, because they have enough adjustments to make on the fly. To have 2 or 3 starters leave on, let's say, August 21st, that'd be pretty tough. Basically a week and a half before you got to cut your roster, 2 weeks before you cut your roster. But the other problem that I would see with that, and it's not a huge problem, I think the NFL wants, they don't want, the reason I think that they're basically cutting down to 80, on August 16th, and most teams have already cut to 80, we know that, but not all yet. I think the reason why they would like to have more, lesser numbers in camp is it's less of a chance to transmit the disease. So if they did that, Mike, I think they would probably want to say that we're going to give you like a 10-day extension on being able to have 80 guys in training camp, because, or as many guys in training camp as you want, because you basically now, if you were going to extend that deadline, you're really making it tough on the coaches to make sure that they have all alternatives at their disposal.
And Peter, as you were explaining that, it made me think of one specific team last year that had to deal with the sudden disappearance of a very key player, the Andrew Luck retirement that happened that last weekend in August. And here's the thing. Depending upon a player's contractual situation, if you don't owe significant signing bonus money to the team, depending upon what your individual deal is, and there's a significant percentage of players who don't have that anchor, that requirement that they have to pay back money. There are guys who are operating under 1-year contracts. Maybe they didn't get a signing bonus at all, or 2-year contracts, or a multi-year deal where the signing bonus has already been fully accounted for. You could have guys just retire. The opt-out deadline is separate and apart, and I hadn't even thought of that until just now. You could just have a guy late August say, all things considered, I'm retiring. I'm not opting out, I'm just retiring, which you're allowed to do. It doesn't violate your contract. It doesn't set you up for a $50,000 a day fine if you retire. The only issue is you may have to pay back signing bonus money, but that's a fallback depending upon a guy's contract. And maybe we will see some of that happen once we get into the 11-on-11 practices, or, Peter, once they have to leave the mini bubble and start traveling to other cities and staying in hotels and playing games against opponents. You could have guys decide to retire during the season.
Definitely could, Mike, and that will not shock me at all if that happens. Because clearly, let's say there's a mini outbreak on a team. If there's a mini outbreak on a team, what do you think that, a guy who might have 3 or 4 kids at home, what do you think he's facing when he gets home every day? I hate to be dramatic about this, but I won't be surprised if 2 or 3 guys on a team test positive and a guy goes home and, the family makes the decision, listen, you go stay in a hotel for a while, and don't come around the family, either that or, just stay away from us, and you go stay in the in the den, and we'll seal it off or something like that. It's there's so many different stories that we don't know yet, that during the season we're just going to see these things pop up every day. And
what you just said, Peter, I think leads nicely into the next point I want to make. Before we do that, though, some words from Dr. Alan Sills, the NFL's Chief Medical Officer. I'm going to be interviewing him for PFTPM coming up in a few hours. But yesterday, via the Houston Chronicle, he said he remains cautiously optimistic about the season because we've spent a tremendous amount of time and energy with these protocols preparing, trying to mitigate risk to the best that we can. At the same time, we have to realize this is going to be hard. This is going to be really hard because this is a tough opponent. Cautiously optimistic. I'd like, a little bit stronger than that, but it's realistic. We don't know. Optimism with caution is all you can really do. And Peter, one of the things that I still continue to be fascinated about is whether a full bubble like the NBA, NHL, MLS would have worked for the NFL. It probably wouldn't have worked as a full bubble, and it probably wouldn't work now to pivot to one and say, we'll start the season in November. We're going to find 150 acres or more of land. You probably need more than that to have that many people and build dormitories and have enough fields and bring everybody in and seal it off. And even then you can't seal it off because food is flowing in and out. Set that aside. What about the possibility, as you suggested, that may happen on a de facto basis with a family saying, hey, football playing husband, you go stay in a hotel until further notice? What about localized bubbles where the players do stay in a hotel, in a separate facility? Matt Ryan told me earlier this week they got townhouses behind their practice facility that they have divided up for the guys where they can go in and they have their own bathroom, they have their own changing room, they have their own bed. Why not just remove the players from their homes, put them in these hotels, put them in a harder bubble? And look, it's not going to be easy. You're going to have more guys who will opt out, but you're still going to eventually have enough players who say, yes, I'll do that to play football this year. That may be the only way to prevent these outbreaks, and I just wonder whether or not that's something that should be or is under consideration.
Well, whatever way you're talking about a bubble happening, you're talking about every NFL player for the next 5 months basically being apart from family. And obviously everybody has credited the NBA, and rightfully so. But if you think about the NBA, 8 of the 30 teams did not go to Orlando, so they're not in any bubble whatsoever. 6 teams are in a bubble for a month, then they will be eliminated and won't be in the playoffs. So that's half the players in the league, a month or less. And then you have 12 more teams where it's about 2 months, the playoff teams. So basically, Mike, it's the vast majority of NBA players are from 1 month to 2 months away. That's a lot different than 5 months. It's hard for me to imagine that a player who has 4 or 5 kids is going to be able to just disappear for 5 months. The practicality of it, that is when I think you would see, I don't know a lot, but you'd see significantly more opt-outs if you insisted, no matter how you did the bubble, that if you had to be away from your loved ones for 5 months.
Well, and I agree with that. But the point is the supply of willing NFL players and capable players, not that we're talking about the same highest level of achievement, but there are plenty of guys out there who can step in. In 1987, the NFL found 28 teams worth of players on the fly to come in. Now, it wasn't great football, but people watched it, and that's what they would do this year. They'll watch it. It's on TV. It's NFL football. They'll play fantasy football. They'll gamble, etc. They'll fill up the rosters, and off they go. But, and I don't know if this is a fair comparison or not, but you've got members of the military who are gone for months at a time, and they make a hell of a lot less than what football players make.
You're right about that, Mike, but that's a choice. That's a choice that people in the military make. You know that.
Well, this is a choice too.
For the military, it is, but you never ever were told at the beginning of this profession, oh, by the way, you got to be away. Teams in the playoffs. Oh, you got to be away for 6 months. You can't have any contact with your family for 6 months. Mike, I understand what you're saying. You're right about that. What happens now if 5 starting quarterbacks in the NFL? What happens if Ryan Tannehill calls John Robinson and Mike Vrabel and said, I'm sorry, I'm not coming? What happens if Tom Brady calls Bruce Arians and Jason Licht. Now, I don't think these 11. It's not happening, but what about Matthew Stafford? You know, I mean, he's had health issues in his family, you know, with his wife, obviously. What about Kirk Cousins, you know, who's Joe Family Man? And look, I don't know what would happen. I truly don't. Maybe every quarterback would just come back, bite the bullet and all that stuff. But I'll be honest with you. If D. Smith and J.C. Treader agreed to this, I would be absolutely, utterly shocked.
And here's the balance, though, and this is why I'm bringing it up. Without that hard bubble per team, if we agree that a comprehensive bubble like the NBA isn't practical, the hard bubble per team where guys aren't going home, they're not potentially taking it home, and more importantly, they're not potentially, for the team purposes, not bringing it back with them from a family member, from a kid who is in school or wherever or whatever may happen. If the balance is, if you don't do that, what are the chances of getting 256 games in? If you do it, what are the chances of getting 256 games in? And look, we are clearly into crystal ball territory, and there's no way to resolve this. There's no way to know. But I don't want us to get to a point, despite the fact that some in the media, Peter, think that we are rooting for there to be no football. I don't want us to get to a point where the season implodes upon itself and we say, the NFL says, we should have just done localized hard bubbles and told these guys you're going to be away from your families for 5 months, and we would have got these games in. We would have played the season. Everybody would have made their money. We would have been able to have a real season with a crowned champion, and we would have been able to show that we can beat this thing. And it would have taken a real sacrifice for coaches and players, but we would have gotten it done. As it stands, we weren't able to get it done because we weren't willing to tighten the belt and make that sacrifice. I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to be the regret that people have. But understanding what you're saying, that it's going to be a major hardship, and it does change the circumstances. It does change what you signed up for. But I'd still say a lot of these guys aren't going to want to walk away from the money. They're not going to want to walk away from the ability.
A lot of guys would bite the bullet and do it. There's no question about it. I guess my question is, let's say you've got the top 500 players in the NFL, however you would grade them, however you'd rank them. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, you get whatever, 15 players a team, let's say, the key 15 guys. How many guys wouldn't play? We've already seen with the Patriots, they probably lost 2 of their 15. Marcus Cannon and Dante Hightower, maybe even Patrick Chung is a third. But the Giants lost Nate Solder. The big question is, how many of those 500 would walk away, really hurting their teams? I would bet at least 100 would walk away. And one of the reasons, I think, Mike, is you and I sit here and say, man, what about this money? How can you give up this money? Well, there's been, I think the number, if I'm not mistaken, Nate Solder has made $71 million playing the sport of pro football. I think he can do without whatever his number is. I think it's 13 or whatever his salary is this year. So I think a lot of these guys would basically weigh it and say, even if it means I'm not going to play beyond this year period, I'm going to opt out. And I think there's more of those than you think. If you said, for the next 5 months, and this is for the teams that don't make the playoffs, for the teams that go deep into the playoffs, if you're a Kansas City Chief, it's not 5 months away from everybody, it's 6. So, and the 49ers, probably. So that is where I think you'd really get into some trouble.
The current NFL approach is conducive to potential outbreaks, in part because, as we discussed earlier, of the delay between sample collection and test result. We could have sufficient outbreaks that could put teams in position where they aren't able to go on Sunday.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.